Hello, everyone. Welcome to ICC's Game of the Week with your host, as always, Joel Benjamin. While the chess world recovers from its Olympic hangover, let's examine another lower profile gem from that great event. Now, Hungary has one of the more interesting teams. It's hard for me to accept that they are one of the oldest teams, led as they are by Peter Leko and Judit Polgar, who are two of the greatest prodigies in chess history. Both of them obtained the GM title as young teens in a time where it was a much more difficult accomplishment. This week, we'll look at Polgar's battle with a contemporary teen star, Dariusz Ćwierć of Poland. Polgar uses a somewhat trendy Sicilian sideline to take her opponent into new territory. Now let's see how it turned out. Judit Polgar playing white, who is now, of course, a veteran, well into her upper 30s, I believe, and a mother of two. And Ćwierć, I believe, is only 18 years old, a world junior champion last year. And here we go. Polgar has always been an e4 player. And in fact, among the Hungarian team, e4 is the move of choice. I don't know if there's a greater significance to that, but it seems that they're all e4 players. And we have a Sicilian and Najdorf, which is no stranger to Game of the Week, but we have Queen f3, and I don't know if that move has appeared yet. It's a sideline that has been actually played for years by the veteran American player Andrew Karklins, who has a kind of eccentric style. And he often followed it up with a fianchetto of the Queen Bishop. And I saw him play it several times without it really catching on. But somehow in the last few years, this move Queen f3 has kind of moved into the mainstream, especially with a couple of nice games from Nigel Short, who likes to use offbeat ideas, and he's played it effectively. Now, the move Queen f3, it of course accelerates the queenside development. White has an idea to play Bishop e3 and castle queenside, and with the kingside pawns, at some moment there might be a thrust with g4, or the queen might move out of the way and send the f pawn forward. All these things are possible at the moment. And of course, white is defending the e4 pawn, something that he may have to play f3 to do in some other situations, and that's actually going to be a factor as well. Now the question is, what does black do? I mean, there's an awful lot of options here. First of all, the most Najdorfy move, e5, which after all is the idea of a6, to prepare e5 without allowing bishop b5 check. Here it doesn't really look well motivated because white can put the knight on f5 with the queen on f3 backing that up. So that's, I guess, one of the points of Queen f3 is to really kind of nullify that idea. Black can, of course, play e6, playing typical e6, d6 small center. And after that, most often white is playing g4, and that transposes into a type of Kerry's attack coming out of Scheveningen. It's as if black answered g4 with a6, and white played rather unusual move Queen f3, but certainly the queen can come to g3 or h3 later on, and that will fit in with the general scheme. There's also the move knight c6, which has been very rarely played, perhaps people fearing that white will take and follow up with e5, although I'm not really sure that e5 is that big a deal. If black just takes, that might be quite playable. So perhaps some grandmaster is going to try knight c6, and we're going to get some experience from that position. So far there've been very few takers, and so that leads most of the games into what was played in this game, g6 and knight bd7, which seems to be the main alternative. Now, Nigel Short has won a couple of games from this position. And one of them can even give the whole game. It's not a long one. Was his game against Niels Grandelius from the Malmo tournament in 2009. And that one, bishop e2, and now g6. We see in a lot of these cases, black is kind of switching to a dragon. And the pawn on g6, of course, is motivated by not allowing a knight to come to f5. So this game continued bishop e3, bishop g7. And you may think that we're going to see queenside castling, but don't be so sure about that. h3. And you'll see this move commonly played to keep something out of g4. Also, the bishop e2 was to make sure that the queen could go to g3 without being hassled by knight h5. Knight e5. Queen g3, b5. It's not always such a great idea for black to block the c-file like that, but here he's thinking maybe to get some pressure on the e4 pawn. And here the timing actually works out nicely for white, because after f5, now Short defended the e-pawn with queen h4, and the queen is in a very good attacking position on h4. Queen a5, kingside castling, sets up play in the f-file. Okay, e8. fg6, hg6, and now Short strikes with knight f5, takes, rook takes f5, d5. Here he just takes it. Black is hardly in a position to defend. Kingside so open. King h1, knight d7. Pardon me, that's knight h7 to cover the g5 square. And now we see another rook lift, rook d4, rook h8, check, king f8. And we see black having trouble defending f7, and finally, in the end, queen e6, not really a fork so much as deflecting the queen away from the defense of the f7 pawn, or also from the defense of h6. So that was a nice win by Nigel Short. Now another one, I won't show you the whole game, but he also had a game against Istratescu from Bunratty earlier this year. That's a very fun event in Ireland. It's actually fast games. I think they're 2-hour games or an hour-and-a-half games, faster time control. So you could expect a little bit more experimentation. That one went knight bd7 here. This time Short played h3 right away, queen b6, and then a very unusual defense. Normally queen b6 is met by knight to b3, but here queen e3, and waiting for the knight to be kicked before moving it away. And black decided not to trade queens. I guess white could play for the d5 square in the endgame. a4. So now we see queenside castling happen. g4, h6, bishop b2, bishop b7 castles, and so on. And Short went on to win that game handily. So many different directions the game could go from queen f3. Svirch plays g6. So now we're into a kind of dragon with the extra moves a6 and queen f3. And, we'll have to evaluate how that fits in. a6 is normally not such a useful move in the standard dragon, where b5 isn't really part of black's play, although you see a lot of Najdorf dragon hybrids nowadays against white playing the standard bishop e3, f3 business. But we'll see how it fares in this game. Okay, so first of all, h3. That's not so much to stop the move bishop g4 right away as to prepare bishop e3 without allowing knight to g4, which would force the bishop to move against. But in any case, if white is going to castle queenside, then bishop g4 would be a skewer. So white needs to play this move. Bishop g7, bishop e3. Bishop d7. Now, this move is commonly played. It doesn't seem that it's actually necessary preparation for knight c6. Again, I think that the move knight c6 can be played right away if takes e5. I don't see that this is necessarily a big problem for black. So I think it is possible to play knight c6 right away. Bishop d7 is, I don't know, perhaps a somewhat more careful move. Now black plays knight c6, it's probably going to be on the table anyway. But now Polgar takes the opportunity to turn the game into a little bit of a novel direction by playing a move that's virtually a novelty. I found one game with this move, knight to d5. Now, knight to d5 is a move that is positionally motivated in the dragon, and we see that in a lot of dragons where white is castling kingside, especially. This is a positional move with the idea that if black exchanges, white takes back with the pawn, and that will often open up pressure on the e7 pawn. White can maybe play for kingside attack or maybe some kind of queenside advance. It's a typical kind of move in Sicilians. In this case, it has a tactical connotation to it, one long range, one short range. The general one is that black is that the knight on f6 is a very useful defensive piece for the king. And by trading it, Polgar is going to perhaps accelerate her kingside attack. On the other hand, after white castles queenside, it doesn't seem like the knight on c3 is missed quite as much, since it's so often a target for exchange sacrifices. Now, the other point to knight d5 is that if black was hoping to delay castling by playing knight c6 and not giving the immediate target, here it's not going to work because knight takes c6 followed by bishop b6 is going to win some material for white. So Svirch does go ahead and castle. Now, it's understandable that he might not find knight takes d5, ed5 attractive because the knight on b8 has no squares with the bishop sitting on d7. However, he does have the opportunity to play the queen check. And after c3, white is not in position to castle queenside. There was one game where white tried knight b3 here, and after bishop d4, e5, it seems that black has a good position. So perhaps it's more logical to leave that knight on d4 and just develop with bishop d3 or e2. But black can try bishop b5, kind of an interesting move to trade, and then the knight can come to d7. So maybe we'll see a future test with that happening. So after castles, white castles, knight c6, and now that ubiquitous move in the Sicilian, king to b1. And you see that all the time. If you're not a master, maybe it seems puzzling, but it's just a very useful move. Number one, it defends the a2 pawn, which is not instantly defended by queenside castling, and it also gets off the half-open c-file, and there's all kinds of tactics that can happen there. In some positions, it's very useful to get off the c1 h6 diagonal as well, though not so much in this case. Also, it could be a useful waiting move as well to see where black is going. Well, here, Svirch plays knight e5, immediately taking the tempo on the queen. And another virtue of this move is that it forces white to play, to trade knights with knight takes f6 check, because otherwise she will have problems defending the pawn on e4. But the knight on e5, once the knight goes to e5, you expect it to come to c4, and somehow it doesn't. So that's slightly suspect about black's continuation. It also looks like rook c8 is a perfectly reasonable looking move, but perhaps Svirch didn't like the answer. Knight takes c6. If black takes with the bishop or the rook, then knight takes d5 might be less attractive, giving white another tempo. And if pawn takes, the rook isn't really so good on c8, but even so, it doesn't seem like it's any big deal. I suppose that in this case, white can play bishop to b6, although I don't think that this would be anything more than a draw. White could have a draw like that, but nothing more. So rook c8 certainly seems like a good flexible move to me. Just I'd be a little bit curious as to how white is going to proceed. There are a fair number of games where white pushes g4 and sometimes puts the queen on g2, but I don't think that the advance of the g pawn is necessarily all that white wants to do here. So knight e5, now we have the exchange on f6, and the queen moves to g3. And f4 is in the offing, so we expect black to answer to that in some way. Here, queen a5 is played. Rook c8 also looks logical, logical dragon move, of course. And after f4, black could come into c4. White can get an e5, but black retreats. And it seems to me that black has very typical kind of dragon counterplay with the bishop pair, some open lines and diagonals. I don't think that black has anything special to be worried about here. Maybe white can play better after rook c8, but it seems like certainly a natural continuation. So queen a5 was played, and Polgar decided to chase that away. Knight b3, and now f4. And Svirch just brings the knight back to c6, which, well, it seems inconsistent with bringing it to e5 in the first place. If it chased the queen to a better square and gave white f4, and then the knight just goes back, it seems like white is moving forward more than black is. Though it's not clear that black is in a bad way after this move. It seems to make more sense to put the knight on c4, and black could actually start with rook a c8, hitting this pawn on c2. White could play c3, and then the knight can come into c4. This is a possible continuation. Now, white doesn't have to take that knight on c4. In this case, with no knight on c3, is a little bit better insulated against that, maybe bishop to d4. But if white plays like this, here black can play e5. And if takes, queen f3, hitting the bishop on f6, we could see takes, and bishop c6, counterattacking e4. And in this position, black is no worse. So it seems more natural to play that way, but Svirch decided on knight c6. And now h4. Okay, it is a dragon, after all, with both sides castled opposite wings. So white going for the typical h-file attack, trying to open that up. And we see that, of course, black missing one of the usual defenders at knight and f6. Seems like it could be promising. So here Svirch plays rook fc8, creating some possibilities on the c file. And here, Polgar does not play h5 right away wisely, because then black could play knight b4, and after c3, queen c6, and already is causing problems hitting the pawn e4. White, of course, can't take the knight because of queen c2 check. And also there's problems, could be problems with the queen coming to a4. Knight takes a2, for instance. So better safe than sorry. Good time for prophylactic move, c3. And obviously it's clear that how king b1 benefited white's position as well. All right, so Svirch decides to prevent h5 And of course, in the short term, it's very nice to keep the white rook on h1 out of the game. In the long term, there will be things to answer for. White is going to open lines eventually, and bishop e2 immediately threatens the h5 pawn, and black backs up bishop g7. Now, there is a possibility of f5 to immediately attack at black's pawn structure. The only problem with this move is that it gives away this e5 square and allows black just to sink a piece into e5, and you want to be wary about giving your opponent outpost for his pieces. Polgar decides that it's better to keep the black pieces from getting all these squares, and just plays queen f2, getting out of the way and preparing for an advance of g4. Well, black now plays a move that really kind of sets the game very much in white's favor, and that's a5. And to me, this is a really surprising mistake, because I think that you can tell that this is not a good idea without needing a computer to show tactics or to calculate any variations, because the black position on the queen side becomes quite strangled after this. And black here needs to play b5, and it's a natural enough move. It gives black some air there. Bishop b6 now doesn't do anything. The queen can just move to b7 or b8, and b5 can be a useful move as well to maybe open some lines with b4 at some moment. And yeah, okay, white is going to go with the attack on the king side, but at least black can potentially do something on the other side. a5 is, I guess, feeling that black has to move right away with the queen side, and is looking to play a4, a3, and that would be great if he'd get that far. But the move bishop b6 just totally ruins everything, because now three heavy pieces for black are going to be totally kept at bay by one bishop on b6. And Polgar simply plays a3, so the a pawns advance is stopped on a4, and now knight d4. The computer suggests that other knight moves are strong as well, but this is kind of most simple and direct. Polgar is prepared to exchange some pieces. Doesn't mind exchanging the knights, because then potentially the bishops, the dark square bishops, can be traded as well, and then white can start getting at the exposed black king. All right, so Svirch makes this exchange on d4, which doesn't seem necessary, but I don't think that there's really much else that's all that great for him. And the bishop comes back to recapture, giving black a momentary respite on the queen side. But now with the structure of this pawn already coming up to a4, it's hard to open lines anyway. For instance, if black plays b5, I don't think that he's going to be able to open lines successfully. If that pawn goes to b4, white can just take with the c pawn. And also, white is in position to trade bishops, and then the black king is totally undefended. So Svirch keeps the bishops on the board, but now the bishop goes right back to b6, and again we see the heavy pieces, no place to go. Bishop e6, and now here we go. The king side gets opened up. And so white has a strong attack going, but on top of that, black has no counterplay whatsoever, and it's even hard to move any of these three pieces. So already it's some desperate measures are going to be needed. First, black takes on h5. I don't know if that makes things better or worse. In addition to taking on g6, there's some possibility in some positions that white might even play h6, h7 if there's a follow-up to that on the king. Rook takes h5, and now black plays rook a6, and and I think that Svirch is right to be a bit desperate in this situation, but that's the wrong way to go about it. Sacrificing the rook for the bishop on e2 really does nothing to stem White's attack. Now, a better try is rook c6. Now here White can win the queen with rook d8. Queen for rook and bishop. But now White doesn't have the same kind of direct kingside attack, and also has to be a bit careful about the back rank. This White does not really possess good luft now, because this bishop on e6 is maybe coming into this square, so it covers a2, and c2 is not so safe. So White has to be a bit wary in pursuing an attack that the rooks don't come in there. So I think that rook d8 would be the wrong way to play. It seemed to me my computer evaluated rook d8 check at about the same level as the move rook g5, but I think rook g5 is much, much stronger and much more likely to be played. Now, this move doesn't threaten queen f6, because if the queen comes into f6, Black would have a trick bishop a2, winning the queen by the rook, but it does threaten to simply play bishop takes g4. So to avert that, Black could try f6, and now White can sacrifice rook g4, take. So in this variation, instead of winning material, White is sacrificing material, but I think that this is the stronger one, and indeed leads to a very difficult situation for Black, because this white squared bishop is now going to be a very useful attacking piece. Black king is very exposed, open diagonals. This a2 g8 is a juicy one, and also a lot of open files, g file, h file, d file for that matter, which White is using. I think White will have a decisive attack. So I don't think that Black could really save the game at this point. But after rook a6, the game actually ends pretty quickly, because White now just has a very direct threat of queen coming to f6. And there's really just no way to avert that, because Black can't really get off get out of the pin. If king f8, bishop c5 check, king is not getting out. So there just isn't any decent way to defend against queen f6. So Svirch goes queen b7, and after queen f6, Black gets one spite check, and the king snuggles into the corner. Well, if Black had a few moves, he would have a nice little battery of his own. But first, he's going to get mated on g7, and if the queen comes back to h7, that avoids mate over there. But then mate comes on the back rank. Rook takes d8, queen takes d8, a checkmate with the bishop pinned. So after king a1, Svirch resigned the point for Hungary, a team that was, among the top teams for a while, but didn't get it done at the end. So they had, I guess, a somewhat disappointing placement. But it'll be interesting to see how long they can go with Leko and Polgar at the helm. They were players that kind of came on the scene, around the early 90s, and they're, still major players. But it's kind of rare for an Olympic team these days to have, to rely on such veteran players with the big youth movement that's gone on all over the world. All right, there you have it. I'm Joel Benjamin, and as always, it's a pleasure to bring the show to you. Thank you for joining me this time, and I hope that you'll enjoy the next one as well.